All right, so we're back to continue work on Module 2 now. We're going to talk about Module 2, Lesson 1, and we're going to introduce these two very important properties, the addition property of equality and the multiplication property of equality in this lesson today, which is where we're really going to kind of start our algebra portion of this course. But before we get to that, we do have a couple of terms to define to get started. When we talk about a math expression, really it's a very general term for any combination of numbers and variables and operations done on those. So some examples of expressions would be like number 5. That's a very simple expression, but you can also have some variables in there like 7x. That's an expression, and then you can have other operations like this has multiplication. You can also have something like 7x plus 5. That would be an expression as well. And these can certainly get more complicated, but these are some good examples of expressions that we'll be dealing with in this lesson. Okay, and then if we take those equation spelling and we take an expression and we set it equal to another expression, then we've created what we call an equation in math. Okay, and so they're very easy to recognize because they'll have an equal sign in them. So some examples of these would be like 5x equals 25. That's an equation. I've got an expression over here, I've got an expression over here, and I've got an equal sign in the middle. So 3x plus 9 equals 35. There's another example of an equation. Again, I've got an expression on the left, I've got an expression on the right, I've got an equal in between them. So we want to be able to recognize those because we're going to be able to do different things to expressions than we are to equations. We're going to have more tools when we're dealing with an equation, and a big part of what we're going to be dealing with today. Okay? So let's start with just looking at a few expressions and talking about how to simplify those. Okay? So let's say we have something like this. Okay. So it's important to note here that this is an expression, right, and not an equation. We're going to learn some strategies later for dealing with equations, and we want to make sure we don't use those here because there's no equal sign in this. So when we're asked to simplify an expression like this, all we can do is combine like terms. We're going to look for terms in our expressions that have the same variable parts. So like these first two terms are like because they both have x's on them. And then these last two terms are also like because they're just numbers. Okay, so got a pair of like terms at the front, pair of like terms at the end. We can add those up, and it's pretty easy to combine them. What we're going to do is we're just going to add the numbers in the front, and these are both positive numbers, so they're pretty easy, but we do want to remember that these could be positive and negative. We want to remember all of our Module 1 sign to number rules for dealing with these. But here, 3 plus 5 is 8, and then we bring down the variable, and we don't change it at all. So add the coefficients, don't change the variable part when you have like terms. Okay, over here, 2 and negative 5, same thing. These are like terms as well. We're going to add those, but now our signs are different, right? So since our signs are different, our rules say to subtract big minus small, so 5 minus 2 is 3, okay, and then take the sign of the larger number. So 5 is the larger number, 5 is negative, so I'm going to bring that negative sign on down. Okay, and now I am done because these terms that we have left are not like. If we have unlike terms in an expression like this, there is just nothing that we can do to put those together because you need to have like terms in order to add or subtract in an expression like this. So we're done. Okay. All right. So let's start talking now about equations and more what we can do there. So let's look at a very simple equation first here. Let's say we have something like x plus 2 equals 6. Okay, so I know it's an equation because it has the equal sign in it. It's got the expression on both sides. to work with. Okay? So what we're going to do with this is we're going to decide, is 4 a solution to this expression? So very easy to check this. All we're going to do is we're going to take this 4 and we're going to substitute it in for x in our equation. And then we're just going to simplify as much as we can. And these are like terms, so we can add those up. And we're going to see if we get a true statement or not. So 6 is equal to 6. This is a true statement always, right? And so what that means is that the answer is yes to this question. 4 is a solution. We can take that value, we can plug it in, if we get the same thing on both sides when we've simplified our expressions on both sides of our equation, then we are looking at a solution. Okay, so pretty easy. Plug it in, work out both sides, see if you get the same thing on both sides. Okay, but you're very rarely, like, you could use that skill to check an answer, but really what we want to be able to do in an algebra class like this is we want to be able to find those solutions for ourselves. We want to use our algebra tools that we're going to learn over the course of this class to find those solutions. Okay, so let's take that same problem and let's figure out how to get that solution. Okay, so we're going to use a property first called the addition property of equality. Okay, so what the addition property of equality says is that you can add the same number to both sides of an equation. And in fact, because we talked about how adding a negative number is the same as subtraction, so because of that, we can really add or subtract using this property, since subtracting is really just adding the opposite of the number. So this property is going to be really useful for us because it's going to let us add or subtract numbers to from both sides of our equations, and that's going to let us proceed with a process called isolating our variable. That's going to be one of our goals to algebra, is to get our variable on one side by itself. So if I'm looking at this equation, this x plus 2 equals 6, okay, if I can get this x isolated on one side all by itself, I'm done. Whatever's left on the other side is going to be my solution. That's kind of my goal here. And using this addition property of equality, it's pretty darn easy because we know 2 plus negative 2 is equal to 0. We talked about how when you add opposites, they cancel each other out, leave you with the 0. Okay, so we can also 2 minus 2 will give us the 0 as well. So you'll notice here we have an addition. And I'm going to think of it as using the opposite operation. So whatever operation I have over here in the expression I'm trying to get rid of the pieces in, I'm going to use the opposite operation. So I'm going to subtract 2 because 2 minus 2 is equal to 0. That'll cancel those out. But the addition property of equality says I have to do the same thing to both sides of my equation. So I'm going to subtract 2 over here. I need to subtract 2 over here as well to keep it balanced. Think of it like a scale. You got to keep both sides of your scale the same. We're going to take 2 away from the left. We've got to take 2 away from the right as well. Okay, we can cross those off. It's very common for us to just say that those cancel out, and the x is by itself, and 6 minus 2 gives us that 4 we're looking for, and that's the answer that we got in the last problem, right? We checked to see if 4 was a solution. The answer was yes. Well, sure enough, we just found it there. It's going to be a big part of what we do for the entire rest of the course, and even in your future math class. This is a really important idea here, okay? So let's use the addition property of equality another time here. Say we have something like okay, so here we want to get rid of this, so we can use the opposite. So we want to get rid of a negative 6. We can add 6 because negative 6 plus 6 is equal to 0. Okay, and that's what we're looking for here. We're looking to cancel these things out. Okay, and if we do it to one side, we have to make sure we do it to the other side as well. We have to keep our equation in balance. Otherwise, we're just messing things up, and we don't want to do that. We want to keep our equations balanced. So -6 plus +6, those are going to cancel. Leave us with that x by itself. Over on the other side, -5 plus 6. Hopefully you haven't forgotten all your Module 1 skills. We do need to be able to add these signed numbers like this. Our signs are different. Our rules say to subtract, so 6 minus 5 is 1, and then we take the sign of the bigger one. 6 is bigger, so our answer is positive, and we've got our solution there. Okay, so that's the addition property of equality. We do have a similar property for multiplication called the multiplication property of equality. Okay, and it says we can multiply or divide both sides of an equation by the same, this one we do have an extra thing in there, we can't do 0, by the same non-zero number. Okay, and this will work very similarly to the way that we used the addition property of equality, except for we're going to use it when we want to get rid of multiplication or division. So let's look at a couple of equations here. We could have something like 3x equals 12. We'll start with a pretty simple one. Okay, so it's important that you realize what operation you're looking at here. When you have the 3 and the x right next to each other, we put things right next to each other in math. It means they're multiplied, right? And just like with the addition property, we had addition, we used subtraction. We used the opposite operation. You had a negative number, we use the opposite. We can do the same thing here. We want to get rid of a multiplication like this. We're going to use the opposite of multiplication, which is division. I'm just going to divide by 3. Non-zero number, so perfectly fine thing to do as long as I do it to both sides. Okay? And the reason why this works is because 3 divided by 3 is equal to 1, and 1x is just x. You can cancel those 3's out, very similarly to what we saw when we were doing the addition property. On the other side, 12 divided by 3 is 4, and we've got the x by itself. Now we're going to definitely do much more complicated versions of this later where we have several steps, but in this first lesson we're just trying to get the basics down. So we're just going to have just one step, one multiplication or division, and then get our variable by itself, and we're finished. Okay? So similarly, we could have a problem like this where we start with x divided by 5. Okay? This time, remember when I write these things in this fraction form, it really just means that they're divided, right? And when we're using these addition and multiplication properties of equality, whatever operation we have, we want to use the opposite operation to get rid of them. So here, we want to get rid of division, we're going to multiply. So I'm just going to multiply by 5, okay? But got to remember, if you're going to do something to one side of an equation, we got to keep them balanced, and we need to make sure we do that same thing to the other side. So multiply by 5 on both sides. 5 divided by 5 is equal to 1. Those are going to cancel each other out, leave us with the x by itself. And then -9 times 5. Got to remember our sign number rules, right? So our signs are different. Going to get a negative value, and then 9 times 5 is 45, and we've got it. Okay? So addition, multiplication property of equality. Look at what operation you have. We're going to use the opposite operation to get rid of it. And then just remember, you got to keep things balanced in your equation. If you're going to do something to one side of your equation, you've got to make sure you do the same thing to the other side of the equation. Okay, so hopefully that's enough to get you started on this lesson. If you have any questions going forward, as we're starting to get into the algebra, so things are going to get a little tougher, but let me know what I can do to help. Y'all have a good day.